that's good. That is good. So glad you're here. Can you believe it? We are finishing Joshua today. If you want to turn there and read, you can. We'll wrap it up. Joshua has made his famous statement in this last chapter. He said, "Choose you this day whom you will serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And it brings up a question in my mind. I don't know about yours. Did Joshua even have a wife and children to call family? It was common for Israelite men to have a wife and children. It's kind of how they were and how they passed things on. But we don't know if Joshua had a wife or children. When he died, no leader stepped up into that role. Maybe you'd say that was part of the problem for why the mayhem in the very next book called Judges happens. When some genealogies of Israel listed in 1 Chronicles chapter 7, if you're a student or wanted to research it, in chapter 7 it records this while listing the men of Ephraim: Ladan, Ammihud, his son, Elishama, his son, Nun, his son, and Joshua, his son, and then it stops, just a period. What about Joshua's son? Well, it doesn't say anything about it. Maybe he didn't have sons. Maybe he didn't have daughters, but maybe he did. I don't know. The one place where it sounds like he had a family is here. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I don't know who he's speaking about. Maybe he's speaking of servants, maybe siblings, maybe family. I don't know. What do you think? You don't have to tell me now. Tell me some other time. You come to your own conclusions. It's just interesting to me. But let's move on in the text, and I want to read some. The Israelites agreed with Joshua. Yes, we will too. We will serve the Lord. And he follows that with, you can't. You won't. You're not able to. And he points to a God that doesn't tolerate a commitment without appropriate actions. He said that God would not forgive them if they didn't hold to their commitment. So Campbell says, of course, Joshua didn't mean that God's not a forgiving God. He meant that God is not to be worshiped nor served lightly, and that to deliberately forsake him to serve idols would be a presumptuous, willful, high-handed sin for which there is no forgiveness under the law, and points to Numbers 15. Well, let's go now. Keep reading. Chapter 24, starting in verse 21. Here's the exchange that happens next. But the people said to Joshua, "No, we will serve the Lord." Then Joshua said, "You are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen to serve the Lord." "Yes, we're witnesses," they replied. "Now then," said Joshua, "throw away the foreign gods that are among you and yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel." And the people said to Joshua, "We will serve the Lord our God and obey him." So they made their commitment. Joshua told them, throw away the useless gods, and the people would be their own witness for the commitment they'd made. Now, what did Joshua do next? Keep going. On that day, Joshua made a covenant for the people, and there at Shechem, he reaffirmed for them decrees and laws, and Joshua recorded these things in the book of the law of God. Then he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak near the holy place of the Lord. "See," he said to all the people, "this stone will be a witness against us. It has heard all the words the Lord has said to us. It will be a witness against you if you are untrue to your God." And then Joshua dismissed the people, each to their own inheritance. So he renewed the covenant between them and God. He wrote it down even in the law that they could have with them all the time. And at this holy place, with their words of loyalty still hanging in the air, he sets up this massive stone beneath this massive oak tree, and it would stand there for who knows how long, speaking of without saying a word, witnessing to without saying a word, for generations to come, what was spoken there that day. That's interesting. Several times in Joshua, these altars, these stones are placed somewhere, built up, erected to say something, even though they don't say anything. We don't have large stones. You didn't pass a large stone on your way into here to remind you of something. We don't put it up under these big trees. But we have covenants. We are people of a new covenant. And we remind ourselves, and we have things that sometimes remind us. They don't say anything, but they do remind us. And I think if you're married, you know which one we think of. If you're married, you probably have around your ring finger on your left hand a ring that says something, even though it has no mouth. This one reminds me and everybody that in October 1999, I stood there with my wife and I said to her 2 words, I do, and I meant it. God heard it, my family, friends heard it, and this ring keeps telling me that every day I live, that I am married to her. There is no other besides her. Some of us may think of the waters of baptism as symbols of our commitment. The bread and the juice that we just took, that's testimonies of a covenant. Even the songs and prayers that we've repeated, we've sung them over and over, and we say it again because of what we have already promised to our God. And no matter what reminds you of your covenant you have with God or with others, don't forget it. Don't ever forget it, what you've said to God, what you've promised to God, because He doesn't take it lightly either. Then the book closes and focuses on 3 burials, 3 graves of 3 great men who led well on their time on earth, Eliezer, Joseph, and Joshua. Let me read this and wrap it up. After these things, verse 29, Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. And they buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnath-Serah in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had experienced everything the Lord had done for Israel. And Joseph's bones, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried then at Shechem in the tract of land that Jacob bought for 100 pieces of silver from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. This became the inheritance of Joseph's descendants. And Eleazar, son of Aaron, died and was buried at Gibeah, which had been allotted to his son Phinehas in the hill country of Ephraim. And that's how it ends. Eleazar, if you know him, the priest who worked with Joshua divvying up the land to all of the tribes, who worked all those years in the people's worship of Jehovah at the temple, at the tabernacle, the tent, I should have said. Joshua, the great leader of Israel, died at the ripe old age of 110. And the best words I think that describe him and his life, back in verse 29, a servant of the Lord, a servant of the Lord. No matter what else you say of Joshua, that says it well. And I think if you want to put something on my gravestone, if I'm buried somewhere, I'm good with that. Servant of the Lord, good enough. 3 men who led well, served well, lived a lifetime, but most of that time for all 3 was lived elsewhere. Joseph especially didn't get to be home. He didn't get to come back home. So he told his family, you do not leave me here in Egypt. You promise me. You bring me out of Egypt. You put me in Canaan. And they did. They kept their promise. These 3 kept their promises to be faithful to God. And he was faithful to them. Here they are, 3 graves of 3 great men, and don't miss it because every grave points to the faithfulness of God. More than anything else, the faithfulness of God. Joshua closes his eyes, I assume, on that day. He's buried in the same ground that he had fought for, the same ground God had promised him and given him. And I'm guessing he lived as he died. He died as he lived, as a man of faith, content to hold on to the promises of God. Slips out of this life and into the hands of the Lord that he had trusted his whole life to lead him and take him home. I thought of this with another funeral, a memorial this week. And just thinking of the number of people that I have seen near the end of their lives. And I know I'm talking to some folks in here who see their lives growing to an end. It's coming, and it's coming soon. As you see, if you've been fortunate enough to see, like I've seen, saints who have gotten near the end of their life, the things of this grow less and less special. The things of this earth grow less and less special. I've watched them in some of their final days or breaths and watched them hold on to nothing here, but hold on to the promises of God. I've said this before, but I still remember Big Jimmy Davis and being in his hospital room, and he didn't know him, big guy, but had all kinds of health issues. And he faced them with courage and in and out of the hospital so many times, but it was obvious near the end that he was dying. And I remember being in that room that day. I was sitting at the foot of his bed, And I said, I want to pray for you, Jimmy. He said, absolutely. And I bowed my head, and you might find it hard to believe I cried. And just thinking of him and crying. And I looked up with tears still in my eyes, and he was looking at me just smiling. He was smiling really big because he knew where he was going, and he wasn't afraid. He was ready. He was ready. Saw that smile again Friday. Saw Phyllis Todd. And she's got more years behind her than she has ahead of her. I don't know how long she will last, but she's ready. She's prepared. And she'll tell you. So I prayed for her, and she's smiling again, smiling. This life is hard, and the closer you get, the better it looks, what is to come. And for all of us, I'm telling you, you got to be ready because your day is coming. If you are young, you think it'll be so long from now. But for some of us, it will be sooner than we think. And at the end of life, the only thing that matters is not a thing at all. I've said it so many times. The thing that matters at the end of our life is the Lord. And it is only the Lord, the promises of the Lord. And whether or not we will in that moment die in the Lord, having trusted Him for what He has said to take us home. And make sure when you die that you are ready. Make sure when you die in the Lord so that you get to go be with the Lord. I was thinking of this chapter and his words here, Joshua's words, and it took me back to a time that really shaped me a lot. I've talked about it before too. I'm getting old enough, I tell the same stories. It's all right, old people do that. But I got to go to Kenya, East Africa, after my senior year at Harding. And I spent about 6 weeks with some other young people, just following around the missionaries, living with them and among them and the churches they were working with. And it rocked my world, and it opened my eyes, and it was life-changing. And when we got to be with the missionaries and hearing them preach and watching them live, it was amazing. And we'd go out into the bush, they called it the bush, and out in the country, and they would gather people together. People wanted to hear these Americans and what they were saying. And they talked about God, and they persuaded them, worship the Lord and only the Lord, follow Jesus and only Jesus, trust in the Spirit of the Lord and only Him. And the sermons were great and sounded something like what Joshua is saying right here. But they didn't just say what Joshua said, they also pushed the people to do what the Israelites were told to do. Throw away your foreign gods. Throw away your foreign gods and yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. And in Kenya, one of these gatherings, I remember being in that field, and the missionaries on that day were preaching really hard to tell the Kenyans, stop trusting in your charms. They believed in the world of the gods, and there were different gods that affected them, and they believed in this culture that if you didn't like somebody, you could go to the witch doctor and give them a certain amount of money, and the witch doctor would put a curse on them. So if I didn't like them, I could put a curse on them through the witch doctor. And the way to protect yourself, so they believed, was to have these charms. They might wear it around their wrist or around their waist. It might be string, it might be yarn, it might be something holding it there with some trinkets, knickknacks, something that would say, this is protecting me from what you have done to try to curse me. And I remember them telling the story of a woman who wanted to be baptized. She wanted to follow Jesus and only Jesus. And when they were baptizing her, they put her down into the water, and the bottom of her shirt came up just enough to show the charm. She was trusting Jesus while she was also trusting the charm to protect her. And so she wasn't trusting the Lord completely, and they had more work to do. The missionaries talked to her, taught her further. You can't do both. You can't trust Jesus and the charms. Only one is powerful and effective, and it's only the Lord. These do nothing. You have to trust Jesus and get rid of the charms. I remember them preaching hard on this one occasion too, where they were preaching and saying, you got to get rid of the charms, get rid of the gods, let them go, trust in the Lord only. And they came with their lighter fluid and matches. And so when the people said, when they would make a commitment, I want to follow the Lord and only the Lord, they said, okay, let's have your charms. And they take them from them. They gave them freely, and they dug a little hole. I remember the little hole they dug and put these charms in there, and they dumped lighter fluid on it and lit them and watched them burn. I still remember to this day what that looked like, that small hole with the charms burning. I doubt very much you brought a charm today to church. I doubt very much you have an idol in your hand. But then again, I can promise you, the idols are surrounding us every day, and it is a battle fighting the temptation to have them and hold them and trust them. Joy Davis in her book said, what shape is an idol? And then she goes on to talk about our idols in America that take on many shapes. She said it may take the shape of a store at the mall, of a convertible that we drive, the house we live in. You want to be honest? Then say it. And she said, I worship the pictures that I paint. Maybe you say, I worship my job. I worship my golf game. I worship my comfort. You might even say, I worship my church. Some may put their trust in politics or money or fame, bowing down even today to Washington, D.C. or Wall Street or Hollywood, assuming that is what can help me and protect me and save me and give me meaning. Some even today, we may giggle, but some today may bow low to a little game today with some men on a field around a pigskin. If you know me, you know I'm not a huge fan of pro football, but I'm a fan, and I've moved to Missouri and tried to love the Chiefs, and I have. It's easy to be entertained by them and follow them and root for them. Later today, Mahomes, and Kelsey, and Pacheco, and Rice, and Jones, and I'll be rooting for them. I see some of you are too. But could I tell you to move to the other side that I have been learning just a little bit more about a quarterback for the 49ers, and I'm impressed with this guy. His name's Brock Purdy, if you don't know him, and I don't. Skills on the field are pretty impressive, but that's not what has impressed me most. He was chosen last, if you don't know his story, in the 2022 draft at the end of the third day, and the person that earns the title Mr. Irrelevant. Mr. Irrelevant, because honestly, who cares about the last guy picked? What's he going to do? He's sitting the bench, third-string quarterback, until both men for the 49ers ahead of him playing get hurt. He's thrown onto the field, spotlights on him. I would suspect low expectations. Just get us through the game. And he does, and he wins and goes 5-0 till he gets hurt. 49ers fans rooting for him, but nobody else really cares, I think, until they get him he gets them to the Super Bowl. And what got my attention was not his play, but his attitude, and it drew my admiration, because I don't know if you know this, but after his big comeback with the Lions and beating them, they interview him, throwing lots of questions at him, asking him stuff. And maybe you've heard when the guy asks about like kind of where he's come from out of relative nowhereness and to become third youngest quarterback to get to the Super Bowl. And he answers, listen to this. Honestly, he said, I think it's just a testament to God and where he's taken me in life. I've never been the biggest, the fastest, the strongest, or any of that. I feel like I've always had to fight for what I get and work for what I get, but God's always given me an opportunity, whether it's in high school, college, obviously the NFL, getting drafted last. And then he says a couple more things. All you need is an opportunity, and watch and see what he does, he says. I put my faith and trust in him, and he's gotten me where I'm at. So when I'm down 17 at half, honestly, I'm just thinking, all right, God, you've taken me here. Win or lose, I'm going to glorify you. And that's my peace. That's the joy. That's the steadfastness. That's where I get it from. I leaned into that, and sure enough, we're able to come back. I still like the Chiefs, but I'm impressed with this guy. And anybody who would, in a moment like that, under the spotlight, give God credit like that, wow. Football may be great, but God matters more than a game, and I'm glad there are some people in the spotlight like Purdy who can say it like that. Because stuff does not bring happiness. And championships fade. And some of that stuff does not add one whit of meaning to life in the long run anyway. Because who wins today will be really cool till 20 years down the road, and nobody will remember except the really big fans. Because at the end of life, some of that stuff fades and it just doesn't matter. Again, one thing matters. One thing. It is the Lord. and where you are with Him. Well, that's how Joshua wraps up with the deaths. And we'll put it to bed for now. And we're about to sing, so we're about done. And what we're going to sing is a good song. It's not an upbeat song, it's a somber song, but I love this song. It's a song we think about by thinking about what we've been saying and what we're willing to do. And sometimes we sing it before communion because it's about the cross. And I like it because it focuses on the cross. It urges us to look at the cross, stare at the cross, contemplate the cross. Look long and hard at the suffering, dying Son of God hanging on the cross. Do you see Him there? Look closely at His head and His hands and His feet, and stare at the blood that just keeps coming out of His body. That blood is sorrow. That blood is sacrifice. That blood is love. And when you stare at Him, what do you think about you when you stare at Him? Because if He gave that for you, what in the world could you give Him in return? There's nothing to be prideful about in the moment of staring at the cross. Don't be arrogant in that moment. Please don't boast about anything you have or you are. But it's a realization where you come to this, because if there's anything I am not willing to lay down in the moment while staring at the cross, then shame on me. And the second verse of the song says, and all the vain things that charm me most, I want to sacrifice them to that blood. What charms you today? And what do you trust? What are you holding on to? Not so much holding in your hand as holding in your heart that you dare not part with because you fear what would happen if you did. And if you're holding on to anything that titillates you, that protects you, that medicates you, that gives you somehow you think purpose and meaning and value, throw it, chunk it, lay it down, give it up, burn it. What is it? Nicotine, alcohol, drugs, porn, lying, deceit, greed, unrepentance, unforgiveness, money, politics, power, job, popularity. What's your charm? What's your idol? What's your false god? Lay it down, throw it out, put it in a pile, and watch it burn. Then turn back to the cross and stare again a while at the bleeding, dying Son of God who sacrificed for you. Now, what would you give Him? And the last verse of the song says, if I could give Him anything, even the whole world, that would not be enough. So thinking of His sacrifice for His amazing love, what does it demand of me? What does He then demand of me? Are you ready for it? Everything. My soul, my life, my all. And today, I hope you lay it down for Him. Let's stand and sing.
When I survey the wondrous